And I've thought about the fact that because I don't have two screens, one where I can see you and one where it's just me, that this recording will have all of us on it. And it will go to people that aren't here this evening. If for some reason you would rather not be seen, I don't want you to see who I'm hanging out with, whatever it might be. All you need to do is turn off your video. And if you do that, I will also do something at my end so your name won't even show up. I really like being able to see everybody because it makes it more kind of, even though I'm just talking on and on, it makes it kind of more conversational for me to be able to see people's faces. So that's my preference, but it's certainly not a strong one. If you need to turn it off, please feel free. Tonight I'm going to talk about the fourth point of mind training, which has only two slogans, which suggests that Jamgon Control, this guy, and the people that he took this from, that go back hundreds and hundreds of years, must have thought it was really pretty important to give the ideas of these five forces or five powers their very own points, the fourth point. Amy, in an email communication earlier, said, gee, how interesting it is that Norman Fisher and Pema Chodron, their takes on this idea is it's almost like reading about a whole different subject. I mean, they're quite different in how they approach this. Some time ago, I actually made a little chart of 6 of the teachers that teach these things. They're the same 6 books that are present on the website under resources if you want to see them. And where is this? I'm trying to do a share screen here. I'm not seeing it. Here we go. I think it's that one. Okay, you can see this little chart here. Are you able to read it? Is it good enough you can read it? Okay, you know, if you want to, you can put your cursor arrow at the side of where the faces are, and you can make them very small and make the rest of it very big. But I just put this up here. I have the thing for all of the 59, or yeah, I guess it's 59 slogans. But this is probably the one in which there is the most variety and different ways of talking about this. You know, they all have to do this is utilization of this practice in one's whole life. How do you really bring it in? And of course, we've been talking about that as we go along. How do we get this off the mat? What do we do to practice on an ongoing basis? How do we do the process of sharing, of the equalization of self and others, and so forth off the mat? All those things. But this goes even more into how do we really get into a habit, which comes up later, of really bringing this into our lives all the time. And these 5 powers are speak to that, and ultimately always speak to really 2 things. One is letting go. Letting go of what? Well, letting go primarily of our connection to the thought that of our self-centeredness, our egoistic self. And then also letting go of the idea that we're ever going to find any kind of lasting happiness out here. You know, chasing the praise, blame, avoiding the blame, getting the praise, getting the goodies and getting rid of the bad stuff, trying to maneuver and manipulate and change our environment in various kinds of ways, and then we'll be happy. And of course, we've tried that all our lives at this point, and we're not. So letting go of that idea is also a part of the letting go that is spoken to both directly and indirectly in these 5 powers. So many different ways of saying that: utilization of practice in one's whole life, an explanation of the path as a way of life, and so forth. Even the words for the five what? Well, some call them the 5 strengths, some call them the 5 forces. Alan Wallace calls it the 5 powers. But all of them have the feeling of something that can be strong and can carry us. Strength, power, force. And then it really starts to shift and change. For example, aspiration is the 5th power for everybody except for Traleg Kapgan, who calls the 5th power dedication and calls aspiration the 1st power. So if you, well, I don't have that on the, if that's of interest to you, if you want to see this, this is, you know, it can be interesting to those who are interested. And if you'd like this, I can send it to you. But what I'm going to be doing this evening is I'll be referring a bit to the others, but I'm going to speak primarily from the way that Traleg Kapgan talks about things. Why am I doing that? Because it's the way that I resonate the most strongly with. And it may be that you don't, but you resonate more strongly with one of the ways the other teachers brings this up. Norman Fisher, as always, is probably the one that tends to be the most unusual in the way he speaks to these things, as you might expect, he being the only Zen guy in here. Well, I don't want to go too far afield. Let's just move through these powers. Time marches on. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing here. There we go. And talk about what, starting the first what Traleg Kapgan calls forces, is aspiration. The other teachers talk about determination, resolution, impetus. In my mind, that which brings the strong determination and resolution comes from our aspiration. And that's why I like the way he starts. Preferences, you know. So the power of aspiration, I've said it at times when we take a moment for our aspiration at the beginning of our meditation, it's kind of the motive force that really drives our conscious living. It's the motive force that asks the question, how do I want to be right now? What is my aspiration in this moment? So just take a moment. We've already done this a little bit, but just take a moment and reflect very briefly on what your aspiration is. Truly. Your deep heart desire. And then check in. Have you brought that to mind today before we sat down together this evening? in a direct way. And looking back over the course of today, are there times when you can see that your actions of body, speech, and particularly mind have been informed by that aspiration, whether or not you brought it directly to your mind, but whatever you did in your mind or words, it really has. That was my aspiration was there. And that perhaps there were other times when that was not the case. Times when you think perhaps you might have spoken more skillfully, did something differently that would have been more likely to ease suffering yourself, your own or someone else's. And another question to ask is, the aspiration is driving things. What's driving the aspiration? What is behind that? Why do you aspire? Trungpa Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Pema Chodron's teacher, who, of course, is a controversial figure in some ways, tells a story of being a young monk, a child monk, really, as I recall, and being up kind of on a rooftop and looking down below and seeing some boys. I don't even want to say the words, it's so horrible, but basically stoning a puppy. And how his heart just went out. And just without thought, just immediately to wanting to end that poor little puppy's suffering. It was just unbearable. May I take the suffering away from you? I mean, Tonglen was just boom, right there. I think that desire that, it can be so clear in that kind of a circumstance, and it's other times more difficult to get a hold of. Can be the engine behind the aspiration of wanting to really be awake, to really understand, to really have compassion, to really live for the benefit of all beings, comes from that innate welling up of the desire to stop the suffering that we see around us. Usually what we see in front of us is not as clear as the image that Trungpa presents. And there are people that we are not, it's hard sometimes to bring up the desire for certain people, they're different for all of us, not to suffer. I mean, even the practice of loving kindness for many of us at the beginning, well, I can do loving kindness for this group of people, but I really just don't have it in me to do it for them. And we learn over the course of time, how do we begin to do that? But sometimes it's not so clear in that way. And then the question comes up, so how can we keep this aspiration fresh so that it really is present for us and helps us in a direct way as we move through the day? And there are a lot of things that can do that. And we've been practicing with some of them. The idea of whatever you meet immediately meet with meditation, and the meditation they talk about really is the meditation of Tonglen, of the exchange of self and others, is one way of keeping your aspiration fresh. That when something arises in you, be it impatience or frustration or anxiety or whatever, to meet it immediately with that Tonglen. May I take it on for everybody. May all beings be free of this. Whenever we go to may all beings, we begin to break down the wall, begin to move away from the self-centeredness. So that's one way. One of the ways I believe it's Fairleigh Cabgan talks about is the bookends of beginning the day. With a focus in some manner on our aspiration, whatever that might be. It might simply be calling the words to mind. It might be using the Morning Gatha, which is also on the website of Thich Nhat Hanh, that ends, may I see all beings with eyes of compassion. And you may have your own ways, but to remember to do that. There was a little thing I wanted to see if I can find it real fast. When you wake up in the morning, do not suddenly jump out of bed like a cow or a sheep from its pen. While you're still in bed, relax your mind, turn within, and examine it carefully. So Patrul Rinpoche, that's who said that, part of the aspiration there is to be aware of what's happening, to be mindful, to be aware, to look, how's my mind? To start the day that way. To start the day also with some words around aspiration. How do I want to go through this day? It's helpful, as we've often talked about also, to have ways of checking in on that as the day moves along. And then at night, to bookend things, to look back over the day. Just take a few moments to review. There may be things that kind of tell you, this is beginning to really seep in. I see that it's percolating in. I'm aware of times when I very spontaneously acted in a way different than what I might have acted 5 years ago, as my conscious living has deepened. And there may also be times when you have a regret. The value of regret is to be able to say, I wish I'd done that differently, and next time I will. Thank you very much. Move on. This is not about castigating and beating ourselves up about stuff. It's about learning. It's about training the mind. So never mind. The second one he calls the power of habituation. Some of the others call it the power of familiarization. You familiarize yourself with something. I have this little connotation in my mind. If I familiarize myself, I'm kind of beginning the process. When I'm habituating myself, then it is an over and over again thing that begins to really change. It gets down to habits. We have positive habits, we have negative habits. And we reinforce and strengthen them each time we repeat them, whatever they may be, right? And we all know that. I wish I could remember the direct quote, but there was someone who said, one of the mainstays, primary things about the spiritual practice is simple repetition. We habituate ourselves, we familiarize ourselves, we repeat the practices. This repetition moves us from this intellectual understanding. Oh yeah, I get that. I understand what Tonglen is. It moves us from that down into the very marrow. Oh, they're the same as I am. We are no different. There I am. There they are. The walls begins to become really a deep, deep understanding. And it happens by repeating, by repeating, by repeating. We don't sit down with our young self one time and do a Tonglen practice of taking the suffering of our 8-year-old self in and extending loving kindness. We do it repeatedly. And the same for any other Tonglen practice we may do for others or groups. We don't do calm body meditation once. We do it every day. It deepens. We see increasingly the nebulous, insubstantial nature of everything that's arising and falling away simply by being present to it. But it doesn't happen the first time we sit down. We have to habituate over and over again. That's why it's so important to have a daily practice. And that's why it's also so unimportant whether we think it's a good meditation or a bad meditation. Totally irrelevant. Just do the practice. Same with this little thing we ran through tonight, the instructions from the second point. Look at the dreamlike nature. We examine the nature of the unborn mind, so to speak. We let go of those thoughts about it. We rest. We do it again and again. And as we do it again and again, our understanding of it deepens. More importantly, the realization of it, that is, making it real, the realization of it, also becomes increasingly palpable and present for us. Same with the practices of the 6 paramitas. Generosity, we don't do it just once. Ethical behavior, hopefully we do that on an ongoing basis. Patience, determination, process of learning to concentrate. The wisdom of impermanence, the wisdom of cause and effect, the wisdom of no self. You look at that over and over again. It becomes a good habit. It's habituated. So that's the second power. The third one, going back to there's quite a number of differences. This is the one about the seeds. Seed of virtue, positive seeds, planting white seeds. There are different names for it. And from what I have read and what I have heard, and from my own understanding of this, I see it in kind of twofold. One is that the Buddha nature, the clear light mind, is right here all the time. That positive seed with a capital S, I guess. It's always present, it's always available. Very often it's obscured. And that's a big part of what we're doing, of course, is removing the obscurations, but that is always present. We can touch it. Hopefully we did some of that this evening with a meditation. What is that? There's no words for it. We can't describe it. When the words come up, letting them go moves us to a different place. What is that place? So that's a positive seed. One way of looking at it is ultimately that's who we are, and that is what we need to learn to identify with, rather than this ever-changing cast of characters with thoughts and feelings and so forth and so on that we think of as me, or the me that thinks it owns the thoughts, all of that. So that's a positive seed. The other one is the idea of planting white seeds. I think of it as nurturing white seeds, because the seeds are all there. And for good or bad, they use white and black. I mean, you could use any number of words for it. So a little quote from Trailer Cab Gun: "Our delusions will be rescinded if we plant or nurture the positive seeds of awareness, thoughtfulness, conscientiousness, caring, fortitude, courage, vigor, energy." You get the idea. So the idea of doing all we can to have these seeds blossom, be present in our minds as we move through the day, of keeping them there when they arise, And on the other hand, being aware that there are also seeds of envy and irritation and anxiety and seeds of grumpiness, you might say. If we allow those seeds to flourish in us, if we kind of, if you've ever been grumpy, I sometimes get grumpy when I'm grumpy. I'm not going to turn the little wheel of grumpiness. And, like any other habit, I'm strengthening it. So it's important to say, wait a second. Which brings us to the next power, the power of exposure, he calls it. And here we have several words that are used. We have 6 teachers in this little chart, and we have exposure, repudiation, revulsion, reproach, and abhorrence. So we have 5 different words for this one thing. And some of them can ring bells in us that say, wait a second, I'm not sure I want to say that. One of the, again, quoting our friend here, our tendency to hide our more undesirable qualities or embarrassing behaviors requires a more candid appraisal. All right. We need to be honest with ourselves. And the exposure is that. We're really looking at it. We're not trying to hide it from ourselves. And the repudiation comes in with the aspects of ego cherishing, self-centeredness. That's what we're repudiating. And it becomes easier to do that as we go along because we know it causes us suffering all the time. It gives us these false ideas that if you get that, you're going to be happy. And how many times do we have to learn? It doesn't happen that way. So when we begin to see the unskillful things arise, and we can genuinely say, I don't want to do that anymore, that's a kind of repudiation. And a couple of the teachers talk about speak to the habit itself. When whatever arises, some selfish thing, you have laid me low on many occasions. I recognize you very clearly now. You are grasping and grabbing, and I will not have it. You're kind of shaking your finger at it. So sometimes I think about this in terms of smoking cigarettes. I don't know about any of you, but I used to smoke cigarettes. And there is a really, really bad habit that really, really is addicting. And when you're a smoker, you want a cigarette. There's no doubt about that. But you get to the point where there's a yuck factor. It's a yuck, like I'm not saying horrible things about myself, but rather this doesn't taste good. Yuck. So there you are, and you're saying, I am so tired of this. You are harming me. I'm not going to put up with it anymore. And some of my ponderings around this have gone from, here's something that I like, and take smoking out of the equation and put in, something for yourself that is a bad habit that you enjoy. And to say, as you work with that, my experience has been it doesn't end up with me with any strong aversion or hating it. I just lose interest. And suddenly it just doesn't, it's just not something I need to think about anymore. So the bipolarity of it goes away. It's not either, I'm going to accept this or I need to reject it. It's just like, how silly. I'm just simply not interested in that anymore. And that can have to do with pride and arrogance. It can have to do with envy and jealousy. It can have to do with many different things. You just say, I'm done with that. It does nothing for me. And then you see it arise a little bit and you just kind of shake your head and smile. But the first thing, don't forget, is the exposure. You have to see it clearly and be willing to accept that it's there before you can really have it become something that is no longer having an effect on you. And boy, are we zipping through this fast, but boy, are we running out of time. The power of dedication is the way Charlie Campbell calls it. Everyone else here is saying aspiration again, except for Alan Wallace, who calls it prayer. Interesting, interesting. But I like the way that Trilling-Cavgan brings us back with that fifth one to the idea of, again, turning to the benefit of other beings. That whatever we bring up that's positive, we are always saying, may this be for the benefit of all. Always seeing ourselves connected, always exchanging self and others, always saying, there's no difference. They're just like me. And one of the things he says about that, he says, by projecting the positive aspiration. So this is dedication, projecting the positive aspiration. So the word aspiration comes in. By projecting the positive aspiration that others may share our merit, as we do at the end of each of our sessions. The merit being the benefits of our positive actions. By projecting the positive aspiration that others may share our merit into the future, we build up a psychic momentum that allows whatever we wish for, that is to be living for the benefit of others, to awaken to our own true nature, to be drawn closer to us. At the same time, I think it also brings up, well, I said it really, it's continually cultivates compassion. May all beings have this. May I share this with everyone. This wonderful experience of resting in the nature, the true nature. I wish everyone could have that. I wish everyone could have that. And it just becomes increasingly natural to realize how wonderful it would be if everyone was to share in these positive things that we experience as we do our practices. So I really feel I did not do this particular point, this particular slogan. I didn't do it justice, but there's a once over, and I really invite you to if you haven't already, to read the chapters of the teacher you're using. Again, you might want to look at the resource section on the website. This is the book I've been talking about tonight, The Practice of Lojong, Cultivating Compassion, by Trilling-Cavgan. Name there. Yeah, up at the top. Sometimes referred to as the Blue Book. The second slogan in this two slogans at this point are using these same practices as practices for dying. So these are the practices for living and dying. And I'm going to stop talking. I've only left us 15 minutes for sharing. But you can read about that. And I think next week I'm not going to try to go forward from too quickly. Let's let this percolate a bit, talk about it again. I would really suggest that during the next week, we all think consciously about these 5 strengths or these 5 forces, and kind of make mental notes of when and how we're using them. So we begin to habituate, to familiarize ourselves with these 5 forces and begin to see how to use them. And simply calling them by name as they are present can be a very helpful thing with that. Truth is, we're doing all these things at times. But to recognize and put into this structure can be a very helpful way of looking at things. So I will stop talking and invite anyone to bow in and share. And I will turn off the recording, and it didn't cut us off, so I think the whole thing is there.